and we should be good to go. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. Appreciate it. Good to see some friendly faces. And Jim, good to get the tail end of your update. You guys are always working on some super cool stuff. So thank you so much for letting Kelly and I present. We want to talk through a project that we've been working on with Aaron Poe over the last sort of year. And hopefully you guys will find it interesting and applicable and hopefully useful. And then we'd be more than happy to answer any questions and follow up offline if that would be more helpful. But what I want to do is talk through some of what we've been doing, and it's been not just us, it's not just been Kelly and I, it's been a huge team effort. We've been working with ABSI, Aaron Poe has a ton of folks involved in the Aleutian Bering Sea Initiative. These are just some of the many people who are involved in this process. So thanks to Aaron and thanks to the Fish and Wildlife Service for sort of pulling together this project through providing the support and the guidance throughout that process. So a quick overview of what we'll talk about today. I'll start out by talking about what actually we're working on, give a little bit of a sneak peek at some of the sample data products, walk you through an example of how this might be useful, and then I will turn the presentation over to Kelly, who will talk you through how you can access this data, what it looks like, and then what the future might look like and ways to engage. The big question, so as you know, I have been playing around with various types of vessel traffic data sets for years. The idea is just sort of resonated with me that there's this massive data set out there and there's a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainty about which vessels are going where, when in the Pacific Arctic waters. So part of this project was to bring together a big comprehensive data set to show how those vessel traffic patterns have changed. And then also to be able to walk through a few of the different ways that we can use that data to assess ecological impacts. So we have two main goals in this project. One of them is to provide publicly, freely accessible vessel traffic data that people can use and plug and play. And some of the first people that we've been working with and using this data have been Fish and Wildlife Service folks. So Kathy Kulitz, the marine bird enthusiasts out there trying to understand the overlap between marine birds and vessel traffic, as well as folks with the USGS. Kelly's been working closely with a stellar sea lion biologist from Alaska Department of Fish and Game. So lots of people are already starting to use this data set. And the second goal is sort of work with these people to produce sample analyses that show how this data can be used. So big picture, we're just providing a bunch of different vessel traffic data freely available. Kelly will talk through how you can actually engage with that data and download that and use it. But first, I do have to talk a little bit about the specifics of different data types. So we're going to provide two main types of data. So that's a raster data, which is basically just like an image. It's super easy to use. You just plug it into a map and it shows you, it's basically like a heat map of where vessel traffic is more intense and less intense over the study region. We're also using a different type of data, a vector data set that uses hexagons. And within those hexagons, we're able to track a whole variety of different attributes. I'll spare you the messy details, but it allows you to do pretty cool stuff, as you'll see in a little bit. So this is an animation that I just created with these heat maps with those raster data sets, just taking for 6 years of data, so from 2015 through 2020, aggregating every single vessel track out there for each month. And so being able to show this on a map just sort of highlights the seasonality, the different hotspots. When we talk about, fishing areas, when we look at Bristol Bay heating up in the salmon season, when we look at the, North Slope oil and gas shipping heating up along the Chukchi coast in the late summer there, we're able to actually spatially sort of visually quantify where those changes are happening. So that's an example of that broad raster data set. So it's super useful to be able to provide that big picture overview of what's happening in all of Alaskan waters. But one challenge is when we start zooming in. So here I'm zooming in on the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. You can see that raster data on the left, it's pretty coarse. It doesn't do a very good job representing all the different individual vessel traffic patterns at that fine scale. So from there, we've also created what we're calling the coastal subset of data that just zooms in. It takes a much finer look at what's happening using a 1 kilometer resolution within a very close distance, within 10 kilometers of shore. And so you can see the difference there. So with this other data set, which would be massive, it would be gigabytes and gigabytes of data if we did it at the full study area. So we just cropped it out just to show what's happening in the nearshore waters, because we figure that those are pretty ecologically important. And again, I'll spare you some of the gory details here, but we've also used the hexagon data set, which allows us to track different attributes. And we've tried to line that up pretty closely with the broader raster data set. So an example of something that we could do with these data sets, and specifically with this new hexagon data set, is we can look at things like a ship strike risk. So what we can do is we can see, hey, are there areas where there's a lot of overlap between large cetaceans and then vessels that might pose a risk to those cetaceans? So we can go into the peer-reviewed literature and we can look at some of the lingering areas for bowhead whales. So this is from a paper from John Sitta that shows where bowhead whales are hanging out from August through October, finding different spots of a good foraging habitat. And then what we can do is we can pull in the vessel traffic side of it. So there's a pretty solid amount of peer-reviewed evidence that suggests that vessels that are large, so over 65 feet, and that are going fast, so over 10 knots, they pose a risk for striking these whales. And then when they strike a whale, it's a really high chance that they're actually going to cause lethal injury. A lot of you guys might be familiar with this work from the North Atlantic right whale populations. There's been sort of coast to coast regulations put in place, a speed limit from Florida all the way up to the Canadian border to help protect these whale populations, with the idea that by slowing these large vessels below that critical 10 knot speed limit, we're going to be able to reduce mortality from vessels to these whales. So applying a similar idea here, so tracking those vessels that are the most risky, so that are large and fast, we can start to see that overlap. And so here we've got those hexagons. We can go into those attributes super easy. I'm not going to walk you through how to specifically do this, but all that documentation is going to be available. We can just show where these areas are and look at these hotspots. And we can see that if we zoom in on Chukotka, so the Russian side of the Bering Strait, we can see that there's a pretty big vessel traffic corridor through there where large vessels are traveling fast, and they're doing that through these near shore foraging concentration areas. So that, in a really quick nutshell, is a sneak peek of the types of things that we can do with this publicly accessible data. And I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, who will pick up the torch and talk you guys through where you can actually get these data.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? Good, cool. So Ben told you about the data products that we created. So our plan from the get-go was to make these data publicly available to anyone who'd like to access them. So the repository that we've identified for these data is the NSF Arctic Data Center. It is a free and public-facing repository. Their web address is arcticdata.io. Just a heads up, the data are not currently on there. I'll talk a little bit about our timeline. We're still fixing up some of the metadata, because in addition to these data, we don't just want to throw a data set at the public. We want to make sure that it is well contextualized, because I know, as many of you are aware, just throwing data, you need to have an understanding of the assumptions as well as the process that was used to create it in order to apply it in an appropriate way. So in addition to those raster and hex data sets, we're going to put together a 2-page kind of quick start guide that's kind of a very simple how to use these data, what you need to know to get started. But we're also working on a peer-reviewed data paper. So data papers are a relatively new kind of journal article. It's peer-reviewed, they're in data journals, and the idea is that they just present a data set. They present how that data set went from the raw data that was collected into the format that's published on the repository. So this peer-reviewed data paper will be paired with the Arctic Data Center upload that's going to be shared. So we're going to put all of these together into, hopefully the data paper will be published in Data in Brief, that is the journal. And the reason why we chose the Arctic Data Center is because it is an affiliated repository with the Data in Brief journal. So we know there's a lot of great work being done by the Alaska Ocean Observing System, AOS, as well as Axiom with them. We're going to hopefully talk with them too if there's a way to kind of cross-post or cross-pollinate there to make sure that everywhere has access to these data. So this project is coming to its kind of conclusion. So Ben kind of told you a little bit about the process. We started back in December of last year, so we're coming up on 1 year. We've been working on these projects throughout the spring and summer. We just finalized the projects this fall, and we're hoping to get the data up in a repository, as well as get that data paper submitted for peer review in this winter. We'll make sure you guys get notified when those data are live. And we're hoping to have everything kind of wrapped up by the spring for this part of the project. Beyond this project, I wanted to put a plug in. I personally am involved in a NSF Arctic System Science grant that's just kind of getting off the ground. And it is looking at patterns of large scale vessel traffic in the Bering Strait region. The big focus of the project is looking at how the Bering Strait region affects the world and how the world affects the Bering Strait region and that kind of reciprocal relationship. So an example would be, Russia investing in oil and gas and those LNG tankers that are now going through the Bering Strait en route, and looking at that from kind of a global to local perspective. We're also interested, though, in how marine vessel traffic affects people and ecosystems and the relationship between them, as well as potentially projecting into the future those distributions of vessel traffic under different scenarios, such as sea ice change or other development initiatives. So one thing we're looking for, though, is as I mentioned, we're in the very early stages. So if anyone has any input or insight on specific areas of focus that would be useful, gaps in knowledge or useful end products, we're very open to starting a conversation about that. Additionally, I wanted to put a plug out there. If any of you guys are thinking about going to grad school or know people who are thinking about going to grad school, we have a master's position at University of Alaska Anchorage. This is a collaborative project between my home institution. I'm a PhD candidate at MSU, Michigan State University, and also with researchers at the Institute for Social and Economic Research at the University of Alaska Anchorage. So there's an MS position at UAA as well as an MS or PhD position. So please feel free to spread the word on that one. My email's at the bottom. It's also on the last side. So happy to get in touch. So the next steps for us, obviously getting that data up and finalized and starting up on this system science project for me are my next steps. However, there's also a lot of other analyses that could be started up. We know there's some efforts to potentially plug in with ongoing management efforts, the port access route study that's going on in the Arctic, as well as other IMO efforts. Additionally, if there are any informal questions or areas of interest that anybody has, we're happy to start a conversation. If there's a particular community that's concerned about vessel traffic around them, that's something that this data set could potentially help with. So I'll finish with just a thank you very much for listening. Here is our emails, and we're happy to take any questions or comments. We purposefully kept this presentation on the shorter end so that we would have more time for discussion as well. So thank you all.
Fantastic. That's great. Thanks so much,